Hey there, solo Beatle nerds. Welcome back to another episode of I Know, a solo Beatles video cast where we ramble on about all things solo Beatles. And today we've got quite a show for you. We have Dan Ealey, who spent some time at Junior's farm. But first of all, I do want to mention that the Ramon album is coming out this Friday, and I heard Fernando Perdomo, who co-produced the album, was kind enough to send me the MP3s as a review copy, and I really enjoyed it. Are you getting the Ramon release?
I'd love to have it. Sure would.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Maybe
So
on vinyl.
yeah, they said it's Cherry Red, and they said that if it sells enough on CD, they'll put it on vinyl. So that'll be
Okay.
so. Let's go back to the early days. No pun intended. Um, when did how did the whole Beatle fandom start for you?
Well, on February, I believe it was February 9th, 64, the Ed Sullivan Show. I was in the Cub Scouts. I was 9 years old. And I went to my local movie theater that day. And before the movie started and all the lights were on, a friend of mine was talking to me across the seats. And he said, "Hey, Dan, are you going to watch the Beatles tonight?" And I said, "What's the Beatles?" And he said, "Just watch Ed Sullivan tonight." So, I mean, that's how it got started. And really, life changed as we knew it the next day. At school, it was all about the Beatles, about fashion, about the way they talked, their boots, their instruments, and it was just a whole different world.
It really was. And just out of curiosity, what's your favorite Beatles album?
Oh, I can never answer that. No, that's it's whatever I'm listening to at the time.
Okay, I agree. Like, did you kind of grow up with the Capitol albums? Because I absolutely adore the Capitol albums. Or do you lean towards the more UK albums?
I grew up with the Capitol albums. I could not afford to buy them new, so I bought my friend's used collection up the street. I still have them today.
Oh wow.
I have all my, I own approximately 20,000 LPs and 30,000 45s.
Wow.
And I still have in all those, in that collection, I still have all my original Beatle records.
And wow, I mean, how many Beatles of those that are Beatles, how many in group, how many do you think they group and solo, how many do you think
Oh, the thing is, I never keep up with them like that. I have friends that come over and go through them, and they'll call me and say, so they saw some article about one of the Beatle LPs, and they'll say, "You know, you have that, don't you?" And I just don't look at them that way. I have them, and I don't really analyze them. I don't know how many copies I have because I until recently I didn't have them in any kind of order. And one of my friends was, trying to get me to put them in chronological order. And so just to appease him one day, I pulled a lot of my albums off the shelves and started to put them in a chronological order. And I would have multiple copies of every LP, which I bought them. It didn't matter whether I already have them or had them or how many I had. I would just pile them up anytime I had an opportunity to get any, or if I bought a record collection and it had various solo or group albums, I would just put them on the shelf.
wow. And do you have like a favorite album by each of the four solo Beatles?
Oh, you just have to understand that I put so much emphasis on every album as it came out I mean, I like one album one day and another album the next.
You sound like me.
I can't really look at them that way because I just love them all. I mean, I may be listening to Revolver today and Sergeant Pepper tomorrow, and I may go through a 2-week infatuation with Sergeant Pepper. So I watch people see them all the time talking about their favorite Beatle album, but I just can never answer that question. They're just all my favorites.
Even for the solo work?
On the solo, I mean, I collected a lot of the solo of all the Beatles, but Paul from the beginning was always my number one.
Wow.
From Ed Sullivan on, it was always Paul. And I guess because when I was about 12, I became a bass player and started playing in bands. And Paul being the bass player, I put a lot of emphasis on him. And so, like I said, I have all the solo records, but if I'm going to listen to something, a lot of times it'll be a Paul record. And I mean, albums that a lot of people criticize, like Wings Wildlife, I loved.
Oh, that's in my top 5 McCartney albums. I love that.
Yeah, I would go through and learn the songs on them, and sometimes in the bands I played in, we might do one of the songs, but if we didn't, I learned the guitar on them along the way anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I would kill to see Paul just do Wildlife in one set, but
well, you know, I saw him a few years ago. I never dreamed I would ever see him do Too Many People.
for the Wings fans.
Yes. And I saw him do Too Many People, and I was blown away with it because, I mean, I'd have to say Ram was a very important LP for me. And so when I never thought I would hear Too Many People live, it was fantastic to hear it.
Yeah, and I would give anything to just be able to see him do any song from Ram live. I don't know how vocally he would be able to do Backseat of My Car these days, but I would give almost anything to see him do that song live.
Yeah, I was trying to think what else I saw him do that stuck out in my mind, but Too Many People was definitely one of them. But I'm a big fan of Wildlife, and I just loved them all. I listened to them all over and over and over, and I just was a big fan. I've got several Wings Wildlife albums. I had Denny Laine sign my Wildlife album.
Wow. I mean, and we'll get to Denny later, but so going back to 1974, when did you find out that Paul was going to be at Junior's farm staying with the band?
Well, I subscribed to Melody Maker magazine, and subscribing to a British music trade paper back then, it was expensive, but I just preferred it over the alternatives we had. And so I had them laying around, but I picked up the newspaper one morning, and there was a little gossip column in the Nashville Tennessean by a columnist named Red O'Donnell. And it had just a blip in a large column that said, Paul McCartney rumored to visit Music Row. That's what started it.
Wow.
And, yeah, just a little blip. And so I started coming up with a plan to see if I could, what if he did, how could I find out where he is? And the next thing, I get the Tennessean and look, and he's getting off the airplane in Nashville.
Wow.
So that launched me into a real panic to come up with a plan and try to find out where he was. So I just started making any call I could in Nashville to anybody in the music business. And I called up I had my Melody Maker magazine, and I opened it up, and it had the name Chris Charlesworth, U.S. editor, on the inside of the editorial page, and it had a number, his telephone number in New York. So I decided I'll call up the editor and pretend to be a reporter, and I'll see if I can, being a British trade paper and they're British, maybe that'll give me a foot in the door. So I called up and I got Chris Charlesworth on the phone, and I told him I was a stringer reporter in Nashville. Paul McCartney's here. I want to cover your magazine. I want to cover him for your magazine. And he asked me if I had any experience, and I didn't want to talk a lot about it. I wanted to just sort of breeze through the conversation. I said, of course I have experience, but I'm going to need a letter authorizing me to represent your paper. And he agreed. And on the 9th of June of 74, the letter arrived from New York. So I had the letter and vague information about where he was, because Paul's visit to Nashville was a hush-hush, top secret thing. The fact that he was there was all that came out, in the beginning. Where he was or what he was going to be doing was not publicized. So I called around some PR agencies, anybody, and I got tidbits of information that they heard he was staying in Lebanon, Tennessee. Another piece of information was it was on Franklin Road in a large mansion that was owned by a doctor with a swimming pool. That was the information I ended up with. So on a Sunday, my day off from work, I got in my car about 10 o'clock in the morning, and I drove about 60 miles to Lebanon, Tennessee, and I found Franklin Road, and I drove up and down the road looking for something that fit the description of a large mansion, a doctor's house with a pool. And I didn't see anything. Everything looked just like your typical bungalow out in the rural area. Franklin Road was out in the country. And I did not see anything that fit that description. So and it was Sunday morning, and there was nobody out on the roads in rural Wilson County. So I had decided I'm going to turn around and go home, but I'm going to see if I could ask anybody where this house could be on Franklin Road. But there was no one to ask. On the way back along the road, there was one man walking, and he looked to me to be a farmer. He had overalls on, and I thought, he is not going to know anything about this, and I'm sure not going to mention the term Beatles to him. But I pulled up to him, and I reached over to my passenger window, and I rolled it down, and I said, "Sir, I'm looking for a house here on Franklin Road. It's a doctor's house, a mansion with a swimming pool." He said immediately, "There's nothing like that on Franklin Road." So I said, "Well, are you certain?" And I repeated it again, a mansion, a large house that would have a pool. It's a doctor's house. He said, "I'm certain there's not one like that." So I thought I would mention the only thing I had left. And I said, "Well, one of the Beatles is supposed to be staying there." He said, "You mean those fellas from England?" I said, yes, they're from England." He said, "They're staying up at Junior Putman's place, but they don't have a swimming pool." I said, "Well, where is that?" He said, "It's just up the road a ways, just on up here on the left, you'll see it." And so I thanked him, went down and turned around, made my way back. And suddenly, instead of the little bungalow houses on each side of the road, that opened up into a large farm with a mansion up on the hill with a large entrance. And it looked like the kind of place that you would expect Paul to be. So as I cruised by the entrance, I was going to turn around in the driveway of the next house, which is very close to the entrance. And as I pulled in the driveway, I see Denny Laine and Jimmy McCullough out on the lawn.
Wow.
So I knew this is the place. And I pulled in, I grabbed my letter, I got out, and I introduced myself. I said, I'm Dan Ealey, I'm with Melody Maker magazine, and Chris Charlesworth sent me. And they didn't say much. I was expecting to get some type of, oh, come on in, or okay, but it was pretty silent. So I said, you do know who Chris Charlesworth is, don't you? And Jimmy said, yeah, I know who Chris Charlesworth is. And that's pretty much how it started. And I told him I had some guitars in the car, which I don't know why I took my guitars, but it's a good thing I did because it was a great icebreaker.
Yeah.
So they said, well, get them out. So we got out the Les Paul, and Denny, at first I said, he had it. And I said, would you show me the opening lick to Band on the Run? And Denny said, I really don't want to play any guitar today. And Jimmy was sitting on the ground under the shade tree. And he said, let me see it, I'll show you. And
Wow.
that's how it got going.
And Jimmy must have not been that much older than you. I can't remember the exact date, but
Jimmy was only a couple of years older than me.
and how old were you at this time?
I was 19.
Oh wow, so you had graduated high school.
I just graduated high school in 72. I was playing in a band, and I was managing a self-service gas station.
Oh wow.
And I would get off about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I would head down there every day.
And go hang out with Wings. Sounds like a reasonable activity.
I would take gifts. I would load up, take gifts, and I would take shirts for the band, shirts for the kids, various different things. Every time I went, I had a load of gifts.
Wow. I mean, what was your first impression of Denny after you kind of got things going?
Well, I mean, I was sort of a fly on the wall is what I tried to be. As just be around. I mean, they were there and they were talking with each other. Alan Crowder, the road manager, and Trevor Jones was there. Jeff Britton, the drummer, they were all around. And I would just come in and sit near them and be quiet while they were talking until I had an opportunity to say anything. And they were around the breakfast table one morning, and I would quiz them. I was quizzing Denny about something about being in Nigeria. And I said, when you were in Nigeria, you had a beard. And Jimmy looks at me and he looks at them and he tells them, he knows more about us than we do. Which we all laughed. And it was, it was great. And Jimmy, it was also an advocate for me by telling them, Alan, when are you going to take Dan up to meet Paul? This was in my early, first several days of being there. that these conversations were taking place. I took my Rickenbacker bass, I took a box of albums that included bootleg records and a box of magazines. And one day when I arrived, they had been looking at the records and they came to me and said, whatever you do not let Paul know that you have these bootleg records here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. I'm guessing he was not happy about the bootleg situation.
Well, no, I mean, it's money that he's being robbed of. So
Yeah,
I made sure that I never brought up anything about bootleg records there. But eventually, I show up with a cassette recorder that I had borrowed from a friend of mine who later became a Nashville TV personality. And I started recording the band's rehearsals. So I would hear them doing Jet, Band on the Run, My Love, Little Woman Love, Hi, Hi, Hi. And then another riff that they would just rehearse that I wasn't familiar with. And they were practicing it and they were going through it over and over and over. It was really, I was wanting to hear the songs I was familiar with, like Sea Moon. They played Sea Moon. And so Denny come in one afternoon after the rehearsals and I said, Denny, what was that song that you guys kept going over and over endlessly? And he said, you'll find out later. And what I found out after they left in October of 74, WLS Radio in Chicago, John Records Landecker, premiered a new Wings single. And it turned out to be the song I heard them working out, which was Junior's Farm.
and wow, I mean, Junior's Farm is one of his greatest songs of all time, and I think, and you were like one of the first people to hear it. That's just amazing.
Well, on my tape, eventually, I mean, they rehearsed this opening very slow, meticulously for maybe an hour or so, just working out. I think Linda or whoever was on the keyboards, I think it was Linda, was working out her parts and they were just going through the notes. But eventually, during my time there, they played the whole song. And this was in June of 74. And they didn't go into the studio to record it until July 9th. And so I have the whole song before it was ever recorded.
It's like what they did with McCartney 3, basically.
Now, Adrian Allen, who put out recently a book on Wings, or McCartney, it's called Paul McCartney, A Music Appreciation, I think.
Yeah.
And he contacted me and was telling me, he said, I think you're the first fan in America to hear Wings live. And I'd never thought about that before. And I said, I don't know. I said, let me think about it a second. I said, they were touring the UK and Europe, but I guess you're right. I said, they had not toured America. They were rehearsing for the tour when they arrived at Junior's Farm. In fact, Junior's Farm was the first single that Jeff and Jimmy appeared on. And so I guess he's right. I guess I was the first fan to hear them live, which is sort of mind-boggling after all the shows that Paul did. But what I was hearing in the garage ended up being the set list for Wings Over America. My Love, Jet, Band on the Run, Little Woman Love, Sea Moon, Soily.
Yeah, I mean, and did you see Wings Over America?
I didn't see them live during that time. I was working a lot, so I wasn't ever able to get away. to get to a show.
But wow. And like, I know you had a little interaction with Heather McCartney, little Heather. Do you mind talking a little bit about that?
Well, I was going every day and hanging out, trying to not be so obvious. I would be out there, but I wasn't exactly standing outside the garage. I would be down in the yard or down in the garden. And she was riding her horse one day, and she had Rusty, the German Shepherd, with her, and they were romping through the meadow. And I guess she spotted me. And I have it recorded. I was running the recorder at the time, and you hear the horse galloping up and the German Shepherd panting. And she says, "My mother sent me to find out who you are. And if you don't belong here, to get rid of you." So, I mean, I'm thinking it's over. I'm thinking I'm going to be gone. And I said, "Well, I'm not bothering anything. I'm a friend of Jeff's." And she said, "Well, actually, you are bothering. And why don't you go to lunch or something, or go over beyond that gate?" And I knew nothing else to say except the truth. So I said, "Well, Paul McCartney's practicing, and I want to hear him too." And that was the end of it. And she rode off, and I remained. And the next interesting thing that stands out in my mind is I showed up one day at the farm, and I'm at the guest house. The band calls it the gatehouse up near the front. And I noticed that, well, Jimmy came up to me and said, "It'll be better if you don't come tomorrow." I said, "Okay, what's going on?" He said, "It'll just be better if you're not here." I said, "Okay, all right." So the next day, I did not go to the farm, but we had a tremendous electrical storm that afternoon and evening. So the following day, I load back up and I head back down there. And as I walked inside the guest house, I noticed Jimmy and Denny were bringing in champagne, cases of ice and champagne. This was unusual activity. This is something I didn't normally see when I was there. And I look out the window of the guest house down toward the pond where they had a picnic pavilion, and I see some activity. And I had a pair of binoculars with me. And I'm looking out the window, and I see Paul. I said, "He's wearing my shirt. He's wearing my shirt." I had taken him a black shirt that was heavily embroidered with birds on the front, and I had on the collar Paul in red embroidered, and he had it on. Well, this was his birthday. This was June 18th of 74, and they had planned a party the night before, but the storm had rained it out.
Oh.
So I'm back there, the party's on, and Jimmy comes up to me and says, "We're having a little get together down at the pond. And Paul wants us to work the gate, but we want to go to the party. But you could do it." I said, "Well, what does work the gate mean?" He goes, "You just let people in that should be in, and you keep everybody else out." I said, "Well, how will I know who?" He said, "You'll know. Chet Atkins, Jerry Reed, and Roy Orbison. He said, if you'll do it, I'll take you down to meet Paul. I said, okay. So I go out to the gate. It's hot. It's probably 98 degrees. The sun is shining full on. It's about 4 or 5 in the afternoon. And I see a Porsche coming down the road. And it turns into the driveway. And I look, and it's Roy Orbison. I look inside the car, and he's wearing black leather, a leather jacket, black shirt, black leather pants. And I'm thinking, oh my God, it's 100 degrees out. And then it dawned on me that it's more important to look cool than it is to be cool.
Yeah.
So I flagged him on in. Now, I'm watching about 400 feet away, and I can see them at the pavilion at the pond. And I'm thinking Denny or Jimmy or Jeff, whenever they get ready, are going to come up and get me. And I'm just waiting. And in a little bit, I see someone leaving the pavilion through the field toward me. And I stretch up to look, and it's Paul. And he's coming toward me. He has left the party to come and get me. And I reached in my pocket, and I pulled out my little camera, and I put it up on the gate post, which was a mistake. I should have kept it. But it was just a nervous reaction. And he comes up to me, he says, "You're the one with the bass." I said, "That's right." He said, "You know, it would be silly for me to keep it." And he and I walked together through the field, down to the pavilion, and he takes me over and says, "Dan, I want you to meet Roy Orbison."
Oh.
So I'm shaking hands with Roy Orbison. They have a little stereo in the background. It's not anything like you would expect at a party. It's very low key. Music on like a cassette player. Denny, Jimmy, Jeff were there. Chet Atkins and Jerry Reed has already left. So I tried not to smother Paul and Roy. I go over and talk to Jeff and Jimmy. And in a little bit, I'll make my way back to Paul. And I said, "Paul, when the Beatles broke up, your fans broke up too." I said, "I had friends that were fans of John's. And when you broke up, we had falling outs. Some fans went with John and some fans went with you. And so many of the fans broke up too." Can you imagine standing toe to toe with Paul, having that conversation with him?
No, I don't think I'd be able to speak if I was toe to toe with Paul.
To show you how nice he was, though, eventually, I have my back to him, and he and Linda go to the car, which was pulled down in the field there next to the pavilion. And Jimmy comes up to me and goes, "Dan, Paul's hollering at you." And I turned around, and Paul's in the car behind the steering wheel. And I go over to him, and I said, "Paul, Yellow Submarine's on Nashville TV tonight. Are you going to watch it?" He said, "I don't know. I don't know right now, you know." And he thanked me for coming, and I said goodbye to him and Linda. And that was his birthday in June 18th of 1974, when he was wearing my shirt. And since then, on his birthday in 76 at the LA Forum backstage, he has it on again. So he wore the shirt twice, in 74 and in 76 on his birthday. That's a great honor for me that he liked it that well.
That is just wonderful. And
By the way, I have here for you
oh,
the bass that I gave him.
do you want to tell us this long and winding road story of this bass?
I'll try to keep it as short as possible. It's a complicated story with some bad parts for me because eventually at the farm, I go back down and I pick up my bass after Paul said it would be silly for him to keep it. And I came back to my hometown of Cookeville and I saw something else I wanted eventually, and I sold it to a gospel bass player who played bass in a gospel quartet. And my bandmates tortured me about it. Why did you sell it? Why didn't you keep it? And I eventually called the man I sold it to and tried to buy it back. And he said, I wouldn't take anything for it. Paul McCartney played this bass. Now, even though Paul is left-handed and this bass is right-handed, it was actually Denny who suggested that he would like it. And, Paul being a left-handed player, left-handed players had to adapt to all kinds of situations in the 60s because left-handed instruments weren't available readily. And so Paul flips them over and plays them. He's done it many times. In fact, many of his guitars are actually right-handed instruments.
That's what my guitars are, and I'm a lefty.
Okay, so there you go. So I come back, I sell it. I'm tortured by my bandmate who was with me when I gave the bass to Paul. He's still in my band today, and he tortured me about selling it. Now, in a small town, you can sort of keep up with where your instruments are by asking friends, hey, does so-and-so still have the Rickenbacker? And eventually he appeared on an album cover with the Rickenbacker. And I would keep up with it like that. But in 1995, I found his obituary in the local paper that he passed away. And eventually I got in touch with his family. I left him a message and his daughter called me. And I said, I'm the guy who sold your dad the Rickenbacker bass. I would just like to come by sometime and see it one last time. I won't take much of your time. If I could have 10 or 15 minutes with you with it. I had a lot of emotions tied up with it. I'd appreciate it. She said that when her daddy passed away, the bass went to his sister in Nashville, and that she passed away and it went to her daughter. And the instrument was either pawned or sold. And so I'm pretty shocked at this information because now I conclude that this is over and I'm never going to see it again. And I tell my bandmate that was with me when I gave it to Paul, it's over, it's gone. And I buy me another Rickenbacker, a 74 blonde Rickenbacker, to take its place. And I've resigned myself to the fact that I'm going to have to live with that. But I mentioned to my bandmate that I said, I never wrote down the serial number to that guitar. How would we ever know? He said, let's look at the pictures. And when he looked at the pictures, he said, you're lucky because there's two identifying marks on this instrument that most of them do not have. One is this dark spot under the pick guard. It may not be visible.
You can kind of see it.
And then up here at the top, and just in the light, you see there's a knot.
Oh, yeah.
And he said, you're lucky because that's how, if we ever run into it, will identify. He said, let me take a picture of you with it in 1974.
Oh, wow.
And I'll have it on my iPad. I said, okay. But I thought he was crazy to think he's going to run into it somewhere. Now, on May 19th of 2017, at about 10:30 in the morning, he called me. He called me 3 times before I took his call. And I called him back and said, why are you blowing up my phone? He said, if you're not interested in the space I've run into, I may buy it myself. I said, okay, what is it? He said, I went to a pawn shop in town and the owner said, you think Dan would be interested in a bass? I've been meaning to call him. Billy said, I don't know. What is it? He said, it's a Rickenbacker. Billy said, okay, what year? He said, well, we looked it up. It's a 1974. Billy said, okay, what color is it? He said, it's maple. He said, Billy said, let me go out and get my iPad. So he goes out and he gets his iPad and he sticks this picture up to him, and the guy goes, that is it. That's the bass. But I just sold it yesterday. He said it was in the pawn shop here for 10 years. I said, 10 years? How's it in here for 10 years? He said it came in and it went in the warehouse and a lot of big stuff come in and it got covered up and everything got shoved back and we forgot about it till yesterday. My dad found it. He put Rickenbacker on a piece of masking tape and set it out and we sold it. Said, but the guy who bought it is not a musician. He buys gold and silver from us, but he'll buy a guitar just to flip. Do you want me to call and see if he's got it? I said, yeah, call and see if he's still got it. So they called him and said, you still have the bass that I sold you yesterday? He said, yeah, I got it. I still got it. He goes, you want to sell it? He goes, that's what I bought it for. He said, well, there's a guy here in town. If it's his original bass, he'll probably buy it from you. I'm going to give him your number. So they called me, they gave me his number, and I called him. And it was about 30, 45 minutes before he sent me pictures of it. I sent him pictures, and he said, I think this is the text I actually got from him. I put in this book because it's significant to the story. That is the actual text.
Wow.
Of the photo that he sent me.
Oh, wow.
And I saw the spots, and he says, I ran home to make your pictures. So I made him an offer on it, told him I would come and meet him in Lebanon, Tennessee. He was in a town outside of Nashville, and I'm on the east side of Lebanon. So we were going to meet in the middle. I'm here, he's here, and Lebanon's here. And so we met in Lebanon because I knew that's where I had given the bass to Paul. So I pull up and he opens the hatch and we pull out the case, and there was a blue notebook with gospel music in it, with the man's name on the notebook that I sold it to. And I got it. And then I eventually got in touch with Denny Laine, who, of course, is on the front here with me with it. And he came down and we set up a gig for him. And we made the picture
Oh, that's amazing.
42 years apart with
Wow.
the same bass. But here's what registers with me. How does the guy who was with me, my friend in the band, who still plays with me today, he was with me the day I gave the bass to Paul. How does he walk in a pawn shop in my hometown 42 years later and discover the bass?
That's just crazy.
He asked me about 3 days later, he said, "You gotten over the shock of getting your bass back?" I said, "I'll never get over the shock of getting it back. It's just an impossible thing." And here's what people ask me a lot. They'll say, "Why did you not have Paul sign your bass?" I was standing in the field one day with the strap on, looking at it, and I was thinking where I was going to have him sign it. This bass was new in 1974. I had worked hard for this bass, and I got it from Manny's Music Shop in New York. Manny's is a famous store. And I looked down at it and I thought, I don't want him messing up my bass by marking on it. So then I flipped it over and I thought, well, I could have him sign it on the back, but I never did. And here's the bonus for that. If I had ever had Paul sign this bass, I would have never got it back.
Yeah.
Because people would have known
Exactly
what it was. So fortunately, fate led me the right direction, and I did not have Paul sign it. He signed other things for me, but I never asked him to sign the bass. Now, all these years later, Jeff, who was the drummer for Wings, who left in 1975, I was friends with him in Nashville, but he had basically moved off and played with a lot of other bands overseas and basically left the story of his history with Wings behind. It took me 4 years to track him down, but I tracked him down in Spain.
Oh, wow.
And I connected with him. My real job for 34 years is I am a private detective.
So I'm sure you have the resources right at the tip of your fingers.
It's helpful. And I tracked him down and we got in touch with each other first by email. And eventually, over a period of time, I called him. I'd sent him pictures about the bass. And he told me this. And it's on YouTube. You can find all my videos and stories on this by searching Dan Ealey, Ealey, Paul McCartney on YouTube.
I'll link it below.
Okay. But Jeff says the bass was a problem for Paul, that Paul had it up at the garage. He was playing it 2 or 3 days, trying to decide what to do about it, but that he did not want to deprive a fan of his instrument. He could have any instrument he wanted in the world. Jeff says that Paul eventually decided that it would mean more to me as a fan if he played it and then returned it to me than if he just kept it. And so that's what happened. Now, Denny says, before I ever got the bass back, I met with Denny one time backstage and we was talking about the bass. And he said, he suddenly remembered he wouldn't let me keep it. I said, wouldn't let you keep what? He said, Paul wouldn't let me keep the bass. He said, after he decided he wasn't going to keep it, I wanted it. And Paul said, there's only going to be one Rickenbacker in the band, and I play it. And so if that had been different, Denny could have had this space, or Denny could have been playing it on the 76 tour. But Paul wasn't going to have Denny playing a Rickenbacker and he plays a Rickenbacker. Just like he wouldn't allow Jimmy to use a Hofner on the tour when he played bass and Paul was on the piano or something, you know. So it's a musician thing. So I'm lucky to have it back today. I, at one time, was reading about Buddy Holly, and after he got killed in the plane crash, how his family in Texas would allow the fans to come by, and they would go to Buddy's bedroom and pull out his guitar and let the fans play it. And so many fans have come here for an opportunity to play a bass that Paul has played. He owned it for 3 weeks. He gave it back. But there's just not any instruments out there that you have that opportunity to do with, because he keeps them all. Now his Hofner made him a gold-plated Hofner in 1965 that they call the presentation bass. It went to a music fair and was on display in London, but Paul never got possession of it and never played it because it disappeared after the music show, after the music fair. It showed up in a music store in 1995 in Doncaster, England. And they went to Hofner, and Hofner verified it is the gold-plated presentation bass, and it sold in 1995 for $205,000. His instruments just do not come up. He keeps them. So I've had this long run with Wings, and I was just a fan, like many of you who's probably watching this podcast. But fortunately for me, I've been able to remain friends with them. Like Jimmy said, well, he knows more about us than we do. Denny said I was one of their best friends during the Wings period. It's a real honor to hear him say that. And Jeff says, without me, Junior's Farm would never been remembered. I'm not sure about any of that, but I'm honored by the fact that they've made those statements.
Yeah, I mean, like with Denny, like how often are you guys in touch, if you don't mind me asking?
It's periodically. I mean, he's called me, I've called him, and I can reach him. But I mean, you know, we don't contact each other every day. I'm in regular contact with Jeff. In fact, you may see on YouTube a video where I went backstage to see Denny. I had been in touch with Jeff, and I teased Denny about I know someone who used to play with you, and they're living in Spain, and they'd like to connect with you. And I keep dragging it out, and he finally goes, well, who is it? I said, it's Jeff Britton. And he makes a statement to the camera about what a great drummer Jeff is and how he auditioned from all those musicians, 52 different musicians, including Mitch Mitchell from Jimi Hendrix. And Jeff got the part. So Jeff wakes up the next day to that video from me, from Denny. And then when I eventually get the guy who played drums in Wings, Jeff Britton, who wasn't really talking to anybody about Wings, to get on a plane in Madrid and come to Tennessee and play with my band on the 45th anniversary of Junior's Farm. In fact, we went together back down to the farm, and we were there at the gates when I got a message from Denny wishing us best of luck and sorry he couldn't be here for the 45th anniversary. So I connected the two of them. I got Jeff to then reply to Denny in a message, and I sent it to Denny, and we connected the two of them after decades. They spoke to each other again.
And I know you just did a cover of Junior's Farm that you and Jeff play on. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, at the event that I had on the 45th anniversary of Junior's Farm, where Jeff Britton came here, and we did a long question and answer interview at the event, and he played with my band, which included Billy, who was at the farm and was the guy. He also met Paul, and he was the one when I gave the bass to Paul was there. He's still in my band today. So the three of us that played in that band at the event were all at Junior's Farm together. And a young musician named Jonathan Pushkar came to the event. And later on, I mean, Jonathan is an up-and-coming musician. He's had some other LPs out, and he decided on his new album, Compositions, that's coming out June 7th, that he would record a cover version of Junior's Farm. And he got in touch with Jeff in Spain, and Jeff recorded the drums on the new version of Junior's Farm. And then Jonathan asked me if I would like to play the bass, and I used the bass that was down there at Junior's Farm to record my part. So Jeff's comment was, who would have ever thought many years ago when he and I were there, me as a fan and him as Paul McCartney's drummer, and we met, who would have thought all these years later he and I would be playing on a cover of Junior's Farm together?
Nobody would have thought that.
I mean, so many things has happened that you couldn't make happen. It's fate or karma, or whatever you want to call it. But many times I've gone back to the farm. I went to the farm when Curly Putnam was there. He and I had lunch at the pool, and we talked about Paul and Wings being there. And the new owners have invited me, and I've been there with them. It's a magical place for me. I always say, people talk about the summer of love. Well, I had two summer of loves. I had the summer of love in '67 with Sergeant Pepper, and I had the summer of love in '74 with Paul McCartney and Wings at Junior's Farm. I got to meet all those guys, hang out with them, and they allowed me to become a part of their lives. And all these years later, we're still friends. And it's all I was a fan. I think it's a great tribute to Paul and Linda, Jeff, and Jimmy and Denny. I don't know what transpired there, how I was allowed inside the inner circle to hang out with them and to continue my friendship. I go to see Denny at one of his shows. I meet him before. This is 4 or 5 years ago. This also was on YouTube on my channel. And Denny, he's doing his concert, and suddenly after a song, unbeknownst to me, he says there's a guy in the audience who came to the farm pretending to be a reporter or a photographer or something. He said, but he's still here, and we haven't been able to get rid of him for 45 years. And that was pretty good. That was pretty good.
I want to thank you for coming on the show.
My pleasure. I love Wings. I love particularly that period. I'm a McCartney fanatic. I've been to the farm in Scotland. I've been inside the office at Soho Square. And I met a lot of the people connected with him. And I still love the history that I have with Wings. And I enjoy sharing it. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to do it.
You are welcome. We are available anywhere where good podcasts are heard. You can email me at iknowiknowpodcast@gmail.com, and just keep watching. Peace.